This happened late last fall when I traveled to an old industrial town in Michigan for an electrical repair project. My project was scheduled to last for a week. Since the budget was tight, my company bypassed major hotels and booked a cheap short-term rental online instead. The apartment was located inside a rundown building complex built back in the 80s. It sat completely isolated on the edge of an industrial park, and the surrounding area got chillingly desolate at night. The moment I stepped out of my truck at dusk, the bleak atmosphere and the extreme silence of the building gave me a strange sense of dread. I walked up to the entrance and retrieved the key from a lockbox hanging on the main gate. I never met the host in person, communicating only through automated text messages. My unit was located at the very end of the third-floor hallway. It was a long, dim corridor with faded gray carpeting that smelled heavily of mildew. Most of the neighboring doors were tightly shut, with zero signs of anyone actually living there. The place felt more like an abandoned structure than a residential building. The inside of the apartment was fairly spacious, but the interior was incredibly dated and worn out. Large living room windows looked straight down onto an overgrown, abandoned parking lot below. On the wooden dining table in the middle of the room, I found a house manual left by the host. Right below the Wi-Fi rules, he had scribbled a very brief handwritten note. The building is undergoing maintenance, so the hallway lights might flicker. Make sure to lock your doors tightly at night. The host offered no further explanation or context for that warning. The absolute silence, broken only by the wind whistling against the window, combined with that vague warning, made my chest tighten. I just stood frozen in the middle of the living room, feeling a profound sense of unease. Something was definitely wrong with this entire place. I got back to the apartment at 10 p.m. After finishing my first late shift, I proceeded to lock the room door using both the deadbolt and the safety chain above. When I turned the lock, I felt the metal turning roughly, and the lock felt unusually loose. I leaned down to inspect the latch receiver closely and discovered a thin, transparent piece of plastic intricately inserted inside. This piece of plastic prevented the deadbolt from fully engaging into the frame, even though the door looked completely closed from the outside. I reassured myself that perhaps the previous tenant had jammed some trash there, or the host inserted it to prevent rattling during high winds. I used a small screwdriver from my toolbox to pry that piece of plastic out, locked the door tightly, and went to sleep. The next evening, I finished my work at the factory and returned to the apartment around 11 p.m. Right as I stood in front of the door to insert my key, I went numb, finding that same thin piece of plastic back in the exact same spot. This repeated occurrence confirmed for a fact that someone had accessed my room lock while I was away at work. I immediately opened the door and rushed inside, turning on all the lights to check under the bed, the closet, and the bathroom. My wallet and laptop were still sitting untouched on the work desk. With absolutely no signs of being ransacked, I messaged the host through the online app to report the strange condition of the lock. He only replied with a brief sentence, "It's probably just the building staff doing a routine inspection. You have nothing to worry about." The host downplaying the severity left me with a vague sense of unease, but I couldn't prove a thing. By the third night, the threat was no longer just indirect signs. Everything had shifted into a direct attack on my living space. At 1 a.m., I was lying awake in bed in the dark when I heard a faint rattling sound coming from the front door. I held my breath and sat up, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. I took the quietest steps possible out to the living room and pressed my eye against the peephole. Outside in the dim hallway, I was horrified to see two tall men with hoods pulled over their heads standing right outside my door. One guy was holding a professional lockpicking tool and continuously working on the lock. The sound of metal scraping echoed clearly in the dead silence. I heard the deadbolt lock start to shift loosely. It turned out they had already slipped the thin piece of plastic back into the door frame without me ever noticing. While I was standing there frozen in terror, another sound echoed from behind me. It was a soft scratching sound against the glass of the living room window facing the abandoned parking lot. I slowly peered through the gap in the curtains. Under the dim moonlight, a third person was crouching on the iron fire escape outside the window. He was using a thin, sharp blade to try and pry open the glass window latch. They were attacking me from multiple directions at the exact same time. The heavy psychological pressure suffocated me as every escape route was completely cut off. My heart was racing and my reaction time was shrinking by the second. I realized with horror that this was absolutely not a random petty burglary. This was an organized hunting plan, and I was their target. This situation had completely exceeded what a lone person like me could handle. Right after that, the main door lock let out a dry click, signaling they had disabled the first layer of locking. With no way out left, survival instinct forced me to act immediately. I rushed forward, using all my strength to drag the heavy sofa in the room to barricade the front door shut. At the same time, I quickly pulled the phone out of my pocket and dialed 911 for emergency rescue. I pressed the phone to my ear, trying to keep my voice from trembling, and whispered in pure panic to the dispatcher. "Someone is breaking into my room. There are multiple guys, and I am completely surrounded." The two sides fell into a direct standoff through the thick wooden door. The men outside quickly realized I had noticed them and began throwing their weight against the door. The heavy sofa was pushed back a few centimeters across the floor. A hand wearing a black glove shoved entirely through the cracked opening, groping around to unlatch the remaining safety chain at the top. Time felt like a countdown in my sheer panic. At the same time, the man outside the window started pounding hard on the glass, trying to shatter it to get inside the living room. Right at the exact moment the door was about to be completely kicked in, the frantic wail of police sirens echoed from the end of the street. Red and blue lights swept sharply across the curtains, illuminating the dark room. Hearing the approaching authorities, the attackers stopped instantly. Their panicked footsteps scrambled in a chaotic rush down the rear fire escape stairwell, to retreat just before the police closed in on the scene. Once the scene was secure, the officers proceeded to take my statement. An older, experienced officer walked up to me and revealed a horrifying truth. Over the past 6 months, there had been 2 similar incidents in this area involving men staying alone for work. The victims were all out-of-town workers visiting for short-term projects. The officer explained that the small piece of plastic in the doorframe was used as a tool to tag the room and disable the lock. He stated they believed a local group was following out-of-town men from work sites, waiting until they were isolated to try and get inside their rooms. The police suspected the host was actually an accomplice who deliberately listed the apartment at a cheap rate to lure individuals staying alone. All the initial warnings and his coldness in the text messages now became perfectly clear and purposeful. The revealed truth left my entire body trembling, and I instantly changed my mind about this business trip. I chose to abandon my goal of finishing the repair project, even though I still had work scheduled for the next day. Immediately, I called my company manager to explain the entire situation and asked to pull out of the project. Acting on the horrific experience I just went through, I understood that my life was more important than anything else. I put my personal safety first and decided I had to leave this town right then and there in the middle of the night without hesitating for another single minute. I quickly packed all my clothes and tools into my backpack under the protection of the 2 officers waiting in the hallway. Before leaving, I knelt down to check under the bed one last time to see if I had dropped any personal belongings. Deep inside the dark corner against the wall, I noticed a strange object sitting out of place. It was a small piece of folded paper shoved right into the corner of the carpet, somewhere a normal tenant would never notice. The paper was torn into a small square from a local newspaper. When I unfolded it under the light, goosebumps broke out across my skin, and my spine went completely cold. On the back of the newspaper clip, someone had used a pen to write down my details in precise handwriting. It listed my exact room number, my license plate, and the make of the truck I was driving. Right next to that was a detailed schedule of the times I left for work and returned over the past 2 days. Every line of text was written cleanly and neatly in ink. That tiny piece of evidence carried immense weight for me at that moment. It confirmed that all my previous fears and paranoia were completely justified. I hadn't chosen the wrong room, and they certainly hadn't picked me at random. I had been watched, hunted, and targeted by a group of people who planned this from the start. I shoved the piece of paper into my pocket, walked quickly out of that rundown apartment building, and never looked back. I got into my truck, locked all the doors, started the engine, and officially left that horrific place at 3 in the morning. Outside, a thick fog had begun to blanket the desolate roads. During the entire 2-hour drive back home in the dead of night, I kept checking my rearview mirror constantly. I was continuously scanning for any headlights, silently tailing me from behind. But the journey passed in total silence, and no more dramatic events occurred. What the true motive of that group was remains an unanswered question to this day. Whether they wanted to kidnap me for ransom, rob me, or had a far more sinister plot against isolated workers, all of it will forever remain a mystery left behind in the shadows of that old industrial town. My story in that place had come to an end, but it left a chilling, lingering effect and a massive void in my imagination whenever I have to travel far. It always reminds me that danger and stalkers out there are completely real, and that nightmare could easily play out again at any other sublet unit we accidentally step into. I always thought those kidnappings and mysterious disappearances only happened to careless people, the kind of people who wander down dark alleys or blindly trust strangers. But I was wrong. It was a stormy, late night when I was heading home after a shift that lasted exactly 12 hours. Outside, it was pouring rain, and violent gusts of wind kept battering my car. The enclosed space inside the vehicle gave me a sense of absolute safety from the harsh weather. I turned on the radio, leaned back in my seat, and told myself that in just another hour, I'd be lying in my own cozy bed. The sound of the rain pattering on the roof felt so peaceful at that moment, but that fateful night taught me a brutal lesson. Your peace can be completely stripped away in just a single brief moment. My car suddenly sputtered and died completely right in the middle of Interstate 15. This was a desolate, remote stretch of highway right on the border of Nevada and Utah. All around me was nothing but the swallowing darkness of the desert and endless rows of dead trees. The torrential rain began blurring my windshield, completely wiping out my visibility. My cell service out there was incredibly spotty, constantly dropping. I had to keep holding my phone up high, desperately trying to open a rideshare app with a sliver of hope. Strangely enough, in less than 3 minutes, the app notified me that a driver had accepted my request. The screen showed he was already right near my location. When I saw the headlights of a black sedan slowly approaching through the sheet of rain, I let out a massive sigh of relief. I genuinely thought I had just been saved from that terrifying isolation. I hurriedly pulled my jacket tight and opened the door, quickly stepping into the back seat to escape the pouring rain. In my panic from the terrible weather, I completely forgot to check the license plate or match the driver's info. The driver was a middle-aged man, dressed quite neatly. He turned his head slightly and offered me what looked like a very friendly smile. But looking through the rearview mirror, I suddenly noticed his eyes were completely still and lifeless. The sharp click of the automatic door locks suddenly echoed the moment I shut the door. That hollow sound sent a chilling wave of unease crawling straight down my spine. He didn't start the ride by confirming my identity or my name like normal drivers usually do. He stared directly into my eyes through the mirror up front and asked in a low, deep voice, "Out here all alone on the highway this late? Huh? Is anyone waiting for you at home?" The car instantly accelerated, speeding into the darkness, but instead of staying on the main highway, he suddenly yanked the wheel and turned into a small off-ramp. It was a rugged, unlit dirt path leading straight down into the wilderness. I looked down at my phone screen to double-check our route. The GPS map on my phone started spinning in circles before losing connection entirely. I tried to use my calmest voice to ask why he was heading down this dark road. He smoothly replied that there was a massive accident ahead, so this was the only shortcut. I glanced up at the dashboard and was horrified to notice a bizarre detail. There was no phone mount or any navigation app running. His center console screen was completely black. Terror began freezing in my chest. I realized he was constantly adjusting the rearview mirror just to watch my every single move in the back. I gathered all my courage and tried to keep my voice from shaking. I demanded that he pull over immediately so I could get another ride. The driver completely ignored my words. That friendly smile from earlier vanished entirely from his face. In its place was a deadpan look, and he slammed his foot harder on the gas. The car tore frantically deeper into the desolate, rain-soaked woods. The headlights swept across gray tree trunks that looked like ghosts surrounding me. Panicking, I used both hands to yank at the door handle over and over, but the child safety locks had completely disabled any chance of escaping from the inside. The door didn't budge even a fraction of an inch. Any illusion of a safe ride completely shattered in my mind. I was hit with the horrifying realization that I had walked right into a bloodthirsty predator's cage. Trembling, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I desperately tried to dial 911 in absolute hopelessness. Through the rearview mirror, he caught the glow from my phone screen. He instantly swerved hard, sending me crashing down onto the floorboards. He lunged halfway into the back seat while keeping one hand on the wheel. His other hand clamped down on my wrist, squeezing so hard it felt like my bones would crush. The phone slipped from my grip and kicked away into a dark corner under the seat. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Just be a good girl," he whispered in a flat, chilling voice devoid of any human emotion. I lay frozen on the dirty floor of the car. Tears streamed down my face, and I cried silently out of sheer terror. I realized I had completely lost control over my own life. The car slammed on the brakes, suddenly in a dark clearing deep in the woods. The driver turned off the headlights completely. The surrounding space instantly fell into a dead silence. All I could hear was my heart pounding. Mixing with the roaring rain outside, the driver slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He turned all the way around toward the back seat, with a bundle of black plastic zip ties in his hand. Sheer terror turned into pure desperation. I pulled my legs up and kicked hard against his chest over and over. I fought back with every last bit of strength left in someone staring down death. He lunged forward, pouncing on me like a bloodthirsty wild animal. A brutal hand clamped tightly around my throat, pinning me hard against the seat. I was completely suffocated, unable to make a single sound. My vision began to blur from tears and a severe lack of oxygen. I stared helplessly up at the dark car ceiling. Chaotic memories flashed through my mind, along with the thought that I would vanish forever in these unknown woods. Right as I felt myself about to pass out, the phone on the floor suddenly let out a loud ding. It vibrated violently, having accidentally caught a single weak bar of signal in the middle of nowhere. The glow from the screen flashed a notification from my actual rideshare app. "Your driver has canceled the trip because they could not find your location after 20 minutes of waiting." At that exact moment, blinding high beams from a highway patrol car accidentally swept across the distant bushes. The blare of a police siren echoed loudly, piercing through the heavy rain. The sudden appearance of the light and siren startled the man, sending him into a panic. He instantly loosened his grip on my neck, terrified of being caught by law enforcement. Taking advantage of his confusion as he turned to look out the window, I gathered every last ounce of strength I had left. I kicked with everything I had against the door beside me, its latch already loosened from that sharp swerve earlier. The door flew open, and I tumbled out onto the rain-soaked ground outside. The driver didn't dare chase after me and instantly hit the gas. The car sped away into the darkness, leaving me curled up and gasping for air in a muddy puddle. I crawled with every bit of strength I had toward the main highway and was saved by a kind truck driver. He immediately called the police to the scene. At the police station, I was shocked to learn that the car that picked me up had fake license plates. That man was a serial killer wanted across the western states. The police confirmed that the actual driver I ordered on the app had been patiently waiting for me by my broken-down car on the highway the entire time. The bruises on my neck and the scratches on my body would eventually heal, but the terrifying trauma in my mind will never fade. Since that fateful night, I have never dared to step into any rideshare car alone after dark. That man still hasn't been caught. He is still out there free, continuing to drive his black sedan through lonely nights to hunt for prey. Sometimes, looking out my window at night, I see a black car parked quietly by the curb. A car with its dashboard lights completely blacked out. Always double-check the license plate, the driver's face, and make sure your app is working before you step inside, because the one picking you up might not be the person saving your life. It could be the one taking you straight to your own grave. The howling wind tore through the dead silence of the barren Wyoming plains at midnight. The fluorescent light outside the old gas station flickered xenon incessantly, accompanied by an annoying low hum. I stood alone behind the cash register, staring into the pitch-black void through the glass windows. A few weeks ago, I had suffered a severe mental breakdown due to the crushing stress of big city life. I intentionally applied for the night shift at this remote gas station, seeking complete isolation to clear my mind. I firmly believed this job would be entirely safe and easy to manage, expecting only a car or two to pull up for fuel each night. I used to think that the glass walls of my booth were a perfect shield to protect me, but I was dead wrong as I stood alone, facing the infinite darkness outside with absolutely no backup. This gas station was situated right along a lonely highway that cut through miles of empty wilderness without a single house in sight. The nearest county sheriff station was at least a 45-minute drive away. Cell service was completely dead in this area, leaving an ancient landline sitting on my desk as the sole method of communication. I had purposefully cut off all contact with my friends and family to enjoy this absolute solitude. Before handing over the shift to go home, my coworker Dale gave me a casual warning. He stared out into the dark parking lot and spoke in a deeply serious tone. "If the wind gets too crazy or you hear any weird noises, just lock the front door and hide inside the bulletproof glass booth. Whatever you do, do not go outside." I chuckled, thinking Dale was just trying to scare the new guy, so I completely brushed off his warning. I decided to leave the main entrance of the convenience store unlocked so any lost travelers could come in and buy snacks. That was my first mistake on that fateful night. At exactly 11 o'clock that night, a massive black pickup truck with no license plates slowly pulled into the lot. Instead of stopping at the fuel pumps, the truck chose a dark corner completely hidden from the security camera's line of sight to park. The windows were tinted so heavily that I couldn't make out how many people were sitting inside. Every single hour, the pickup's windshield wipers would suddenly flip on, swiping back and forth twice across the bone-dry glass, even though it wasn't raining at all. I tried to reassure myself that maybe the truck had an electrical glitch, or the driver accidentally bumped the lever in his sleep. But my survival instincts were already triggering warning signs about a deeply unsettling anomaly. My rational mind still desperately clung to those coincidental explanations just to keep myself from panicking. By the time the clock struck 1 in the morning, the highway ahead was completely desolate. Without a single flash of passing headlights, the space around the gas station became so utterly isolated that I could hear my own heart pounding against my ribs. The massive glass storefront windows began to rattle violently under the pressure of the gusting winds blowing in from the plains. Suddenly, the high beams of the black pickup truck flashed blindingly exactly 3 times, aiming straight into my booth before cutting out. It happened with cold, calculated precision, like an invisible countdown had just been activated. The feeling of an unseen pair of eyes glued to my every single movement sent a violent shiver down my spine. I completely shifted from a relaxed state to hyper-alertness, finally realizing that I was the target of a twisted stalker. The pickup truck door swung open, and a tall, heavily built man stepped out into the pitch-black night. He wore a thick brown work jacket with the hood pulled up, completely obscuring his face. Instead of walking toward the gas pumps, he took slow, heavy steps straight toward the main entrance of the station. He reached out, grabbed the glass door handle, and yanked it hard a few times to check if it was truly locked. He didn't bang on the door or shout, but just stood completely still outside the glass, staring his blackened face directly at my booth. I tried to keep my cool by looking down, pretending to flip through invoices on my desk to show I wasn't afraid. Psychological pressure weighed heavily with every passing second, as the man just stood there like a phantom outside the door for 5 solid minutes. The man slowly let go of the door handle and began pacing backward toward his black pickup. He cranked the engine and drove the truck forward, parking it sideways right across the station's only exit. This move officially blocked any view from the highway into the store, and vice versa. I realized I had completely fallen into a trap, and escaping to my personal car was no longer an option. My original goals of earning money and finding peace instantly vanished, replaced by a primal fear for survival. I picked up the landline receiver to call the police, but the line only emitted a steady, rhythmic clicking because the outdoor wires had been cut. I reached down to grab a heavy tire iron from under the cash register, gripping it tightly in my sweaty palm. Terror began stretching into infinity within the dead silence of the booth as I faced 4 grueling hours of waiting for daylight. The clock struck 2 in the morning, and the space inside the convenience store sank into a suffocating silence. The humming from the freezers containing sodas became crystal clear, feeling like it was torturing my eardrums. The landline, which had already had its wires cut, suddenly rang with a sharp, cold sound that made me jump. I stood frozen in place for a few seconds, my whole body trembling, not daring to reach out and touch the receiver. When the phone rang for the third time, I took a gamble and lifted it to my ear, not daring to let out a single breath. From the other end of the line came the heavy, gasping, broken breathing of a man who was absolutely terrified. "Please listen to me. Do not open the security glass door under any circumstances," he whispered in a voice trembling with fear. "I am the actual owner of that black pickup truck." The voice on the phone continued to plead through choked-up sobs. He explained that he had been attacked and kidnapped by a psychopath on a lonely stretch of road several hours ago. He was currently bound hand and foot with duct tape, stuffed deep inside the iron tool chest in the back of the pickup truck. He had used the smartwatch on his wrist to trigger an emergency call that connected directly to the gas station's line. The panicked man sobbed, "The guy is wearing my brown work jacket. He just stepped out of the truck again. He's going to kill you." I looked up and saw the man in the brown jacket clutching a rusted crowbar, walking rapidly toward the glass door. I was horrified to realize this call wasn't a prank, and the danger was 100 times greater than anything I had imagined. I survived that horrific night because I managed to dash and hide deep inside a steel security locker at the back of the storage room. For several grueling hours, I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to stifle my sobs as I heard the crowbar smashing violently against the security glass outside. That crazed killer only gave up and fled into the pitch-black night of the barren plains when a county sheriff patrol car randomly drove past the gas station. The moment the red and blue emergency lights flickered alongside the wailing siren, I collapsed onto the floor, my whole body shaking from pure exhaustion and terror. I immediately handed in my resignation that very morning and packed my bags to leave the state of Wyoming for good, without ever looking back. The incident that night left a deep and brutal psychological scar inside my mind. It completely stole my sense of security, turning even the most familiar spaces into dangerous traps. To this very day, the true identity of the mysterious man in the brown work jacket remains a massive question mark for investigators. The police only found the black pickup truck abandoned on a secluded trail about 10 miles north of the gas station. Inside the iron tool chest in the back of the truck, the poor owner had long passed away from severe blood loss following fatal wounds. A few months later, I moved permanently to a small apartment right in the heart of a crowded and bustling major city. I accepted the noise and pollution of the city just to run away from the terrifying silence of those remote countrysides. The costly and bitter lesson I learned after that fateful night is that isolation has never been a safe haven for the soul. To the psychopaths out there, your solitude is the most perfect hunting ground they always crave. The story seemed to have closed, but those horrific memories still silently stalk me into late-night sleep, especially on stormy nights. Whenever I stop at a red light on empty streets at midnight, I reflexively glance at the rearview mirror. My heart tightens with utter terror that the man in the brown jacket has been sitting in the back seat all along. He will lean close to my ear, smile coldly and whisper, "The countdown game has only just begun."